Hello, Bill.
Good morning, Matt.
Welcome to the DMZ, everybody.
So we are taping Thursday morning before Biden's acceptance speech, but after Kamala Harris's speech and Barack Obama's speech. So there may be things that occur tonight that might alter our sense of the convention.
Well, wait a second. Let me just jump in, because if that happens, Bill, and it will, you and I are going to be doing a special DM Zoom.
Yes.
On Friday. So we will be discussing the totality of the convention, because by next week, the DMZ is going to be focused, I'm sure, on the Republican convention. But if you want to hear our take on Biden's actual nomination, that will be in our private, exclusive. Let's call it what it is. It's exclusive VIP. So stay tuned for that.
This is like when, for those of us who grew up in the 80s, you went to see Back to the Future 2 in the theater, and then it ends with to be continued with Back to the Future 3. Next year, you're like, well, I just sat here for 2 hours seeing this nonsense, and it's going to end later? I got to pay again?
No, this is more like Back to the Future 1, when it's an awesome movie, and you feel like you got your money's worth, and at the end, Doc Brown comes out and says, where we're going, we don't need roads. and you can't, and you don't feel cheated, but you can't wait for the next episode.
I don't think anyone knew at that point there'd be a 2. You thought that was just the fantastic ending.
Well, that's the brilliance of the ending, is it would have worked either way, but it certainly keyed up a sequel.
Yes, it did. It did. A terrible, terrible sequel.
You know what? I've revisited that, Bill. I agree. I hated that. I was so excited. I went to see Back to the Future 2 at the theaters, just like I'd seen Part 1 at the theaters.
Right.
Went to the theaters, and I was very disappointed in Part 2. And just a few months ago, against my better judgment, I watched it on Netflix with my kids.
I did the same.
And I had underrated it, Bill. It's actually a much better film than I remember.
I completely disagree. It was just as terrible as I remembered. It made no sense. It was just a series of disjointed scenes that were designed to drag the storyline out as far as possible to get you to Part 3.
Well, look, we could get into it, and believe me, I would love to have this discussion. But the main point is, today we're going to talk about the first 3 nights of the convention. But if you're part of the DM Zoom gang, and you should be, you could hear the rest of the story tomorrow when we do that talk.
And, you can be part of it if you're not already a Patreon supporter of Matt, Lewis, or I. You only have to give to one of us. You don't have to sully yourself and give to both. Pick your favorite. We're not keeping score or anything, but pick your favorite. And then you can have access to the DMZ Zooms. But enough promotion, Matt. Enough promotion. Let's get down to business.
Frankly, I've grown tired of your shameless promoting of this stuff. But anyway, yes, let's move on.
I was a little surprised that the tone of night 3 was very different than the tone of nights 1 and 2. I thought nights 1 and 2.
I liked 1 and 2 better than 3. Unlike Back to the Future.
Nights 1 and 2 were targeting the Matt Lewis voter, the person who's not already sold on Joe Biden, maybe someone who doesn't like them both, right-leaning suburbanites, trying to bring them over and say, it's okay, the water's warm, Biden's going to look out for you, he's not a tool of the radical left, yada, yada, yada. And with the Barack Obama speech and the Kamala Harris speech of night 3, much more blunt talk about racism, blunt talk about threats to democracy. I think more satisfying for. I mean, there's some elements of attempts of persuasion there.
I agree with what you said. I would say, though, Obama is the guy who knows how to do it all. Mm-hmm, and Obama's speech was a speech that I could get behind.
Okay.
That did not. So what happens is, and by the way, it's so interesting, right? I can't imagine any nominee would ever want to go back to the old days where they didn't control virtually everything said at this convention. Biden can control.
Yeah.
There really aren't a lot of surprises. And I can't imagine a nominee would ever want to go back to, having somebody on stage who refuses to get off stage or an uprising AOC.
Well, Biden couldn't have John Kasich or Colin Powell at a 2016 convention because they would be booed by all the Bernie delegates there, and it would be a terrible spectacle. But go on.
Perfect example. But point one, I can't imagine a nominee ever going backward and giving up relinquishing that sort of message control. But Obama is really, this just shows you what a good candidate he was, is that he spoke about these things in a way. Because what happens is, even with the condensed 2-hour format, I'm listening and like, oh, that sounds discordant. Or like, they had me and then Elizabeth Warren had to come out, or Hillary. They had to put Hillary on, and they had to for a political you can't not let Hillary speak. But yes, you could. You actually could say Hillary isn't going to speak, and they should not. They should say Hillary isn't going to speak. But and you're right. The third night was the most discordant for me. The more opportunities for me to like have cringe, like, oh, they had me, but Obama's the guy who could check all the boxes. And his speech, Bill, because here's where I think the fundamental breakdown is. Obama, as evidenced by his speech, believes that America and America's founding was fundamentally good, and that the promise of America was fundamentally good, but we were flawed. And the journey of America, the story of America, is becoming a more perfect nation, and that process. And that is a worldview I can get behind, but I always get the sense that a lot of people on the left don't really believe that. They think that America is fundamentally a bad country that has all sorts of systemic problems that can't really be fixed without a revolution, so to speak.
I mean, this is kind of the whole 1619 debate. You know, what is the origin of America? Is the origin fundamentally rotten? Or is the premise of America fundamentally good and revolutionary in the positive sense that was sullied by slavery, but ultimately the ideal of America overcame that over time? And I think, you know, Obama generally tells that narrative. Biden tells that narrative. You know, Frederick Douglass and Martin Luther King, you know, used the words of the Constitution to advance their causes and did not argue that the Constitution was fundamentally bad. So I think there's a lot of history in the Obama-Biden narrative there.
Hillary, and I'm saying Kamala, in her speech, Kamala, and sort of in passing, alludes to this, but it sounds much more cliched. It's like she's just saying it. Whereas when I felt like Obama, being like a constitutional law professor, I felt like Obama gave more specifics and was really meant it. Whereas Kamala uses that rhetoric, but it feels much more like pablum when she says it. Well, at least last night.
I mean, I can't speak exactly for your thought process, but I mean, what struck me about Kamala's speech, and perhaps I shouldn't be surprised, I was a little surprised, because nights 1 and 2 were so heavy on outreach to moderates and soft Republicans, emphasis on Biden being a decent man, bringing people together, unifying the country. I thought that Kamala, both by direction from Biden and for her own long-term self-interest, would want to present herself more in that mold. So this is her introduction to a broader swath of America, you're essentially beginning the 2024 primary in all likelihood. Here's your chance to say, this is what I'm really all about. I'm really a pragmatist. I'm a unifier. I can be the president for all the people, et cetera, et cetera. But you really leaned into, I'm a child of Berkeley. I grew up watching the protest of the 60s. We need to do the work on racism. I mean, nothing that is going to get used in an attack ad against you. It wasn't anything that was, wildly off the rails. It's just tone and emphasis. She was emphasizing that her life story begins being raised by progressive activists. And I think there is a logic there. She is being, I think, used as a way to keep the base energized.
Right.
And I think it is plausible that she can do that without upsetting the apple cart, without blowing up the Big Ten coalition Biden has. But it does mean
if night four ends up being, geared toward Matt Lewis, then night three is just, night three doesn't loom as large, right? It's in context. It's in a larger context.
And I think in that sense, Kamala is, for those who think that she was sort of all in this for herself, like, that's more of being a utility player for Joe Biden. That's helping Joe Biden maintain a big tent by focusing on the base. That's not looking out for Kamala number one. That's not playing to 2024 right out of the gate.
Unless you think the energy is all on the left and that heading off AOC and basically protecting the left flank from AOC is the key.
I mean, you could look at it that way. But I think if she is succeeding a largely successful Biden presidency, I don't think she has to worry about her left flank all that much. And I think and the audience here was a broader audience. This is an audience of people. I mean, maybe the ratings are terrible and it is just base voters that she's talking to, but in theory, you're speaking to a much bigger swath of the country than you were in a primary. This is your first contact with them. You might want to connect with them in a different way. And she chose not to do that for whatever reason.
Bill, I mean, I think if this race were perceived to be closer, then Democrats might be putting on a different type of show, right? I mean, I've always operated under the assumption Biden has to win Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, and he wins. But because he's opened up these new areas like Arizona and Georgia, they've gotten away from that, and that's why I thought Klobuchar would have been the pick I would have gone with, right? So I don't know. I haven't looked lately at the census, but I think there's still 70% of America is white. If you watch that convention, and it's supposed to be look like America, you would get the impression that the average American is probably a Hispanic woman or something. I mean, and I don't know how much that matters or how much Biden is trying to win over working class whites in middle America anymore. But I would say that the diversity is on full display, and I think that's fine. But just from a standpoint of trying to win the election, are they trying to persuade the Romney sort of the Obama Romney Trump voter? It feels like they've gotten a little bit away from that messaging.
Well, I think they're trying to do it all. I mean, you had the white working class element in the convention so far. You had in the roll call the worker from Ohio saying we're getting screwed. You did not have, an AOC type talking about Green New Deal in the climate segment last night. You had it partially narrated by a white union worker. Although they also had a self-described Afro-Latina activists talking about environmental justice. You had both. But all of it really focusing on jobs and not talking about it being a Trojan horse for socialism and whatnot. So, I mean, I think they're trying to cover all those bases. And I think amongst the, Romney Clinton or, Obama soft R, Trump suburbanite, upper middle class, voter, I think there is a lot more openness to a diversity message. These are the folks who are recoiling at Trump's actions post George Floyd. So I mean, it's a very fine line they have to walk. But I don't think that balance overall is out of whack. It's just that Kamala's role in that is leaning more heavily towards speaking to the traditional Democratic multicultural base. So I'm curious, when you're watching Kamala, if you were not as enthralled by Kamala as you were with Obama, are there specific parts?
I thought, Obama's speech was the best of the night. I think he overshadowed Kamala to some degree. Also, I mean, he looked great. The backdrop was great. She tried to do this thing where it was a hybrid of like a real acceptance speech, and it wasn't horrible, but it wasn't great. And I thought that it was very awkward when Biden came out at the end. Mm-hmm. But Biden comes out, but there's no audience, and they can't touch.
Right.
So Biden can't give her a hug. He can't hold hands with her. You know that thing where they sort of like lift their hands together like that? But Kamala did that weird thing where, how they like point like, I mean, she was doing that to the TV screens behind her, the thing where you're like pointing. So it was like an attempt. That was the one time where I felt like they tried to have the convention experience and it didn't work because of the new format.
I do question it. I mean, I don't think it's disastrous by any stretch. And I think they did it that way to send a message. We're taking social distancing seriously. You should take it seriously. But I do feel they could have put out a message that said, look, once she's vice president, we've all gotten tested. We're gonna be in a pod now, like many of you are in pods, and we can be within 6 feet of each other because we've done our due diligence, and we can now hold hands in the air like you're supposed to. I think they could have done that and not undercut the social distancing message.
Think of the visual. In a way, it would have been so powerful, and I'm sure they'll get around to it. This is going to happen, right? And they're going to do it, and it'll be a moment when they physically embrace. Like that will feel important because of the context of COVID.
Well, I want to go back. Are there certain lines in Kamala's speech that you didn't like? Or was it just a vibe that you didn't like?
No, it was just a vibe. I don't think it was a great speech. It didn't repulse me or turn me off. I just think it was just kind of a missed opportunity. It was just an okay speech. Obama's speech, there was the line where he said something to the effect of Black Lives Matter no more or no less than any life, something to that effect. Yeah. I'm paraphrasing. And that struck me as a super interesting point because I think it's really hard to argue with that. Like that's a point that's so hard to argue with. And like in that regard, we're all Black Lives Matter supporters. I mean, we all should be, right? Lowercase BLM. It's the Black Lives Matter movement that I think stands for more than just that. But the interesting thing for me is when white people have said all lives matter, that has been criticized as sort of trying to diminish, like, the reason we had to say Black Lives Matter is that people were acting as if they didn't. And when you say all lives matter, of course they do, but but by saying that, you're sort of diminishing the problem. But isn't that kind of what Obama said? If you think about it, he basically said all lives matter, but he can say it, and I think he has the moral authority.
Well, he said it in the way that it should be properly said. I mean, the whole point of Black Lives Matter is to say they are not currently mattering at the equity level that they should, and that needs to change. And so when you retort all lives matter, you are ignoring that problem. Obama's just taking an extra sentence to say the obvious common sense point that Black lives shouldn't matter as much as everybody else's life.
But I think it's an important thing to say because, first of all, there's so little that we hear in a convention that is shocking, that surprises you. And so Obama didn't have to add that part, right? He could have just said Black Lives Matter and it would have been fine. Nobody would have thought any more of it. But the fact that he went and he added that, I think it does two things. One, it tells white folks that he cares about them too, and that he's not kind of running up the score because all of a sudden it has become, in vogue to basically only talk about Black Lives Mattering. And I think it's also an inclusive message that it's a permission structure that could bring white voters into his cause. Right. And it's a move of addition. It's a unifying move. And I think that there's not a lot of that going on, actually, in politics. I mean, it's so I don't know. I thought it was a really significant moment that if the Democratic Party and the progressive movement incorporated more of that rhetoric, I think and they're doing well already. Right. I think the Black Lives Matters is already very popular last time I checked, but I think this would make it even more popular.
Well, what's always fraught with the politics of race is that too many people look at it as a zero-sum game. And so anytime there is talk of advancing the standing of people of color, you get a group of white people thinking, well, this means they're taking a chunk out of me. And I'm going to fight it.
But sometimes it does, Bill. Sometimes it does. I just saw that USA Today, and I could look it up to get the details, but they're making some sort of a commitment to diversity, which I'm all for. But it sounds like what they want to do is, and by the way, there's no political diversity. There's no ideological diversity. It's just like gender and ethnic diversity. But it sounds like quotas, like they are going to say, half of our workforce are going to be people who look like X, which means certain people may not get the job, even if they're qualified for it, because they look a certain way, because of your immutable characteristics. You're a white dude. You may not get the gig at USA Today, even though you would, in a meritocracy, have earned it, right? And so I think that there's a reason. There's a reason why people view it as a zero-sum game.
This is why Jesse Helms had the hands ad that he used to beat Harvey Gantt with. There's always that worry among some white people that once you start talking about things like affirmative action, that they're going to get the short end of the stick. And I mean, this is why a lot of politicians are very hesitant to use blunt language like Black Lives Matter. Remember, Hillary Clinton, right out of the box of 2016, her first comment was all lives matter. And she was just being a traditional politician saying, I'm going to make sure that my rhetoric is inclusive. And it doesn't sound like I'm being zero-sum trying to take things from somebody. And then when she got scolded by that, she recalibrated and started to say Black Lives Matter and try to put it in a broader context. But then at that point, the phrase was more of a polarizing phrase and probably didn't help her in the long run in that election.
Yeah. I think it's not, when Hillary said that, she wasn't just falling back on what a politician would say. She was actually falling back on what had been, I think, the ethos of liberals, which is to say, we're aspiring for a colorblind society where people are not judged by their, skin color or other immutable characteristics. I mean, that's what liberals used to believe, and now they believe something different.
Well, there's always been these divisions. You saw Bill Clinton talk about the divide between John Lewis and Stokely Carmichael. I mean, the left has not been of one mind on these questions from the get-go. And, the push for reparations on the left that has gotten an uptick since the Coates essay in The Atlantic. I mean, that is straight up redistribution. That's the kind of thing that, is not popular broadly. You've not seen Joe Biden, give it the full embrace. But I mean, that's the kind of thing that, in a vacuum, Black Lives Matter can feed the notion of pitting one side against the other, one race against another, that makes certain whites recoil. Now, I think after George Floyd, you're seeing more understanding among some whites. Like, oh, I get what they're saying now. They're not trying to take a chunk out of me. They're being treated as subhuman by some police officers, and that should change. So it's easier to say it now than before. But Obama is sort of bringing it back to a more inclusive message that I think his knowledge of race politics says that's safer ground to be on. Yeah.
So I thought... in a way, he overshadowed Kamala. I thought his speech was very good. But, the whole thing about just the convention in general, I mean, the format. Well, let me ask you this, but we haven't talked. I think it was night 2 when AOC had her minute where she didn't endorse or support Joe Biden. What was your take on that?
I actually thought it was kind of brilliant on all sides. I mean, I've seen a lot of people on the left complain that she's getting a quasi snub and not getting a full 5 minutes. She's getting less time than John Kasich, less time than Colin Powell, but I don't think she really wanted to give a 5-minute speech where she'd be obligated to say a bunch of nice things about Joe Biden. The fact that Bernie got a nomination is in some sense traditional. Bernie was nominally nominated in 2016. Hillary was nominally nominated in 2008. Although in those cases, the candidates themselves interject the roll call and move to endorse by acclamation, which they didn't do this time, but perhaps that's more logistical because they did the whole round the 50 states thing. And so AOC gets to not have to publicly, go against her brand and praise Joe Biden to the sky. She can stick to love of Bernie. And then go back to her base afterward and say, look, I'm not saying don't vote for Joe Biden. Vote for Joe Biden. I'm voting for Joe Biden. But the fight goes on after he wins. In Biden's case, she doesn't overshadow the convention. She's not being portrayed as the heir apparent. There's a lot more emphasis on reaching out to the middle and Joe Biden being a unifier. So everybody gets what they want out of this. It does mean some tensions are going to linger going on, but you can only do so much.
And by the way, I mean, that roll call vote was probably the best thing that we've seen from the whole convention. Just in terms of using the new media, it was better. It was just better than like Maryland, the state of Frederick Douglass, the state of crab cakes, the state of Cal Ripken Jr. sends 32, it was just better visually. I mean, some of those, you hear like a farmer with his cows talking in Iowa or Nebraska or something, and you could have like somebody sitting like in Fenway Park in Massachusetts, just the backdrop. It was just better. And you could do 57 states and territories in 45 minutes probably or something like that. That was better. But again, I mean, Biden, there's never been a nominee, as far as I could think of, who's had this much control over what the message is. I mean, there was no chance for AOC. Like, what if AOC wanted to, like, have a floor fight or like actually force some sort of a vote or on the plank or something and then start an uprising. And like people could have been in the crowd holding signs that said Bernie or, you know, those air horns and just, I mean, one thing is just the speed of which, right? Like if Reagan, you know, I recently went back and watched some of his convention speeches and Steve Kornacki pointed out the 1980 speech, you know, there's at least 5 to 10 minutes of time where he's like, well, thank you. Thank you. Sit down. You know, God bless you too. You know, and like there was no wasted time. And so in terms of a lean operation, although I still think there's fat to cut, and an on message operation, like, can you imagine a nominee wanting to give back, to willing to cede that sort of control again at a convention?
Yeah, I will not be surprised if conventions change forevermore after this. But I want to make 2 points based on what you just said. One is a bit of a tangent. You mentioned the Reagan 1980 speech, and you said, you know, God bless in passing. But I wrote about this 5 years ago. I think it was 5 years ago. The Reagan 1980 convention acceptance speech is the first time that any nominee says God bless America at a convention acceptance speech. And he didn't just say it. There, you watch the end of the speech, there's this whole song and dance that he does, which he and I think it was acting, where he pauses and he says something along the lines of, I'm not sure if I should do this.
Yeah, that's acting.
Yeah. And goes on to say, Can we begin this crusade with a moment of silent prayer? And the convention pauses for more than a second. And mind you, Jimmy Carter was the evangelical candidate 4 years prior.
Yeah.
Reagan did not run on a heavy religious platform in the primary of 1980. This was a pivot in the summer that he laid on super thick at the convention. And now it's become commonplace for politicians to say God bless America, but it was not up until that point.
Yeah. And I have to say, I felt like the first night of the convention, they do the Pledge of Allegiance under God, and you had a pastor come out and say a prayer in Jesus' name. And I mean, if I weren't a Christian, it may read totally differently to me, but like to me, that was like, okay, this is a Democratic Party that, you know, they're not booing God anymore. You know,
I think they've always done that, though. I think there's always been benedictions and things like that. They don't always get talked about very much.
It struck me as very authentic and important at the moment for whatever reason.
The one thing I wanted to say about the roll call was, you know, there's some people who are sort of angry that Bernie is still being nominated and why is he causing this division and whatnot. I thought it's kind of embarrassing for Bernie. I thought the roll call, state after state, Bernie getting 2 votes and Biden getting 96. I mean, I kind of get why he did it, because I think he just wanted to tell his people, you know, I'm in it for the long haul. You know, your vote mattered. Your delegate vote got counted. But I think the net of it is to say, look, you guys don't control the party. AOC, you don't control the party. This is Joe Biden's convention. This is Joe Biden's nomination. And I think I imagine that'll be further reemphasized on night 4. While you're not, but you don't get the displays of rebellion on the floor that you would have if this was a traditional in-person convention. Think of the speech
that Pat Buchanan got to give in '92.
Half hour speech.
It was pretty awesome, the culture war speech, and it, you know, apparently it might have hurt Bush, right? That's the narrative is that it hurt Bush. I don't know if it did or not. It was great entertainment, I could say that. And there's some parts in there that are just amazing, parts that really resonate today. Like there was a line where Buchanan's talking about these, if something about these ethnic, Irish American, Italian American kids on the playgrounds and places like Poughkeepsie, and they don't read Edmund Burke. They don't know who Frederick Hayek is, but they know what it means to care about America and to be a conservative. And the Republican Party needs to be, it was very much speaking to explaining the Trump voter, I think, well in advance. But Buchanan, it may have hurt Bush, but think of the platform that gave Buchanan. And Bernie got none of that. Bernie got none of that. All Bernie got was 2 delegates for Bernie, and then they twist the knife. And 80 delegates for the next president of the United States, Joe Biden.
I remember seeing a congressional debate in '92 at Oberlin College. Sherrod Brown was running for Congress at that point. He wasn't in Congress yet. And forgive me if my memory is fuzzy. This is what I remember. This was after the Republican convention. And he made a reference to, I heard at the Republican convention in Berlin. I mean Houston.
Gosh.
That's how
people said that was the speech was better in the original German, right?
That's how
that was the joke.
That's how much of a impact that speech had. That really overshadowed the convention. No one remembered George Bush's acceptance speech in '92.
Yeah,
everyone remembered.
Well, it was
Buchanan's
a great.
speech.
Look, you may not like what Pat Buchanan had to say, but it was a better. Bush was probably like 1,000 points of light. Wouldn't be prudent. Pat Buchanan is a better theatrical performer. Yeah. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. It was a people were out there with their pitchforks and lanterns at that point.
And it's very similar in the not in the substantive sense, but when Ted Kennedy gave the "Dream Will Never Die" speech in 1980. It was similarly overshadowing of the nominee, a nominee trying to get reelected.
Or Reagan in '76. Yeah. Who didn't even have a speech. Maybe he had a speech, but the moment that people remember is Ford trying to surprise Reagan and throwing it to him. And then people are like, hey, we picked the wrong guy. But guess what? Bernie Sanders didn't get that. Neither did AOC. They didn't get that moment. And they might have, it's possible, in a real convention that they would have.
So, I think at the end of the day here, conventions are not always unifying events. And I actually wrote a pre-take to 2016 talking about how, divisions at conventions can spill over into the general election. Even 92 for the Democrats. Jerry Brown was a thorn in Clinton's side that whole convention. And it's not remembered so much because he won. But the fact remains that a lot of Democrats did break away from Bill Clinton and voted for Ross Perot. The people that Jerry Brown represented were not thrilled with Bill Clinton's nomination and did not stick with him. It just happened that similar bleed happened on the Republican side, more so. So when a convention often, maybe it's, symptom and not cause, but they can reflect lingering divides and may perhaps exacerbate those divides. And at minimum, this convention, whatever divides exist in the Democratic Party, they are not being exacerbated by the spectacle because it is so tightly controlled by Joe Biden.
Yeah, I can't imagine a nominee wanting to go back. I think it'll be one night where the nominee gets to come out and give a speech to a huge crowd. But I don't think anyone else is going to. Hey, let me ask you, again, let me just tease. So we're doing a DM Zoom tentatively set for 4 p.m. Eastern time on Friday, where we will talk about what happens with Biden's actual nomination and acceptance speech and all that jazz. But let's look ahead a little bit to next week. I think Republicans have an advantage in the sense that they were not the first. I think there's a first mover disadvantage here. So far, Democrats have done. I pointed out a couple of problems, but I think for reinventing this format, I would give them an A, maybe not an A plus, but an A for coming up with a way to do a convention remotely. I would tweak a few things, but pretty good. Republicans theoretically have an advantage of having gotten to see what Democrats did. But what do you think Republicans need to do, both from a almost like technological format standpoint and also from a messaging standpoint? Like, what do they need? What do they need to do next week?
I mean, I feel like need to do discussion is completely beside the point, because
no, let's pretend that we have a normal candidate like that you could do staging and theatrics and put on the show you want to put on, and like Donald Trump all of a sudden has become like a normal politician and he's willing to let you do it. What do you do?
I mean, a normal politician would take the advantage of the media platform and speak to those voters he needs to bring back into the fold, convince them that it's been a successful 4 years, that anything bad that's happened was, out of his hands and he's doing his best to get things back on track, and that the alternative choice is bad in all these various ways, and is not up to the task. Now, I think the latter is very hard for Trump to do because Biden is seen as a very experienced individual, and Trump is seen as obviously very incompetent by the majority of voters at this point. But he's not going to do anything like that. He's not going to, whatever you think he should do to reach the middle of the country, he's not going to do. This is going to be reality TV show spectacle, full play to the base, one hand grenade after another, crazy cameos like the gun-toting couple in Missouri, the high schooler that got unfairly maligned in the MAGA hat when he was on the mall during the pro-life demonstrations. It's going to be just one bit of base fodder and cable TV catnip after another.
Is that kid? Do we know that kid's speaking, or is that just you? It's a totally plausible.
I thought I read that. I thought I read that he was going to speak.
Okay.
I mean, maybe,
you might have. It's totally plausible.
I could be misreading like a Babylon Bee headline or something, but I believe that actually is happening.
Well, I mean, satire and reality have, there's really no distinction anymore. But I think it's very likely. Yeah. Okay. I think you're right. I'm toying with writing something about that. So this is my shameless excuse to pick. I don't have full access to Bill Scher's brain when kids are when school is out. So I have to pick my spots when I can.
Well, what I'm curious about, though, I mean, I would think. I think a lot of the Democrat convention was not great TV. I think there are moments that were better than others, but it's a bit hinky at points. Dealing with all the technology, it was very saccharine. It didn't. There weren't a whole lot of moments that really popped out. Few did. Trump is a reality TV guy. Like, that's what he does. That is his skill set. And I would imagine he spent more time on the TV presentation than Joe Biden spent on his, because that's what Trump cares about. He cares about the ratings. He cares about the surprises and the big moments. So I have a higher expectation in terms of production quality and dramatic arc and wild, crazy developments. But it also may be that because it is so slapped together, because they moved the venue around so much and weren't expecting it to be so, TV oriented and not happening in a big hall, right, that they may not. It may be sloppy in its own way too, and that might also, to the extent that Trump has anything to gain out of having a spectacle, that might weaken the ability to have a spectacle.
I can't see. Working for Trump would be so hard, right? Like, I've worked for a lot of bad bosses. And if Trump had said like 6 months ago, we're going to do this all online, or, it's going to be all remote, all virtual. And these are the three big themes we probably need to hit. And I've hired the best in the business. You guys go make it happen. Then I think it could be great. But Trump is going to be, I assume he's changing things on the fly. People are coming up with ideas and spending a month or two working on it. And then he comes in and just blows it up and says, no, that's it. We can't do that, you know? And so, like, I've worked for people where, you know, I had one job where, like, we were completely redesigning a website, you know, or stuff like that. We'd be like redesigning a website, and our programmers would say, like, we need at least 6 weeks to do this. And my boss would say, you can do it in 3. That's bullshit. You can do it in 3. And so they had to do it in 3, and it worked as long as nobody was visiting the site. And then as soon as people started waking up and logging on, the site crashed. You know what I mean? But think of the stakes here, right? This is like, the stakes are so high, but Trump is so capricious. I think there's like would be just a chance for like a meltdown, you know, something unrealistic expectations, in other words, in terms of the technological, like Trump's like, yes, I know we can do this. We can, you know, and Trump's like, it's a little dicey. We've only got 2 weeks to put it together. Like, don't you think that's possible?
Oh, totally possible. I mean, this is not, and he's not a detail-oriented person. And his whole campaign apparatus seems to be in disarray. So sure, I can totally see it being a train wreck in a technical sense as well as in a substantive sense. One thing, if you don't want me circling back to the Democrats for one more thing, and this might change after tonight, but I am struck by how little policy is being discussed at the convention. Now, generally speaking, it's not a forum for 9-point plans. The conventions are generally more thematic, but you're not even seeing, you know, a particular policy goal being drummed. It's not like it's public option, or carbon tax. You know, if it was Elizabeth Warren, you know, there'd be a 2 cents chant going on all the time. You know, there's just, and for Bernie, we Medicare for all. I mean, there are nods to issues. We've had a nod to climate and a nod to immigration and a nod to gun control. But there's no concrete, like, we are in this to pass this bill as soon as possible. And you know, maybe Biden changes that in his acceptance speech tonight and lays out particular goals. But I feel like there is a lot of latitude Biden is giving himself, you know, for better or for worse. Because but
when you think about, I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but just when I think about the candidates in recent history who have run on a specific policy mandate, like 999 Herman Cain, campaign finance reform in 2000 John McCain, the flat tax Steve Forbes in 88 and I think 92, they don't tend to win, right? But with Biden, it's more a sense that that it's a return to normalcy. So, like,
build back better. Normal's not good enough. Build back better. That's the main slogan out of this thing. Although, but to take your point, there is a return to normalcy underlying element to it.
Yeah, but I like build back better. I think that's a good slogan. I've heard other people criticize it. I think it's decent. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean it's not like the greatest of all time, but I think it captures what they want to capture.
It's not hope and change exactly, but maybe that's the point.
I mean, I think there is subtle strains of return normalcy in that. We're going to have a functional government again. We're going to have a decent approach to working with each other again.
It's like we're going to build back. It's a little better. We're going to return to normalcy, but just, you know, we'll take it up a notch, not too much, just a little better. I'm down with that. I would settle for if we actually build back better. If we actually do that, we can do worse. We probably will do worse than building back better. I hope we don't. But
what's tricky is to be overly specific in your mandate risks losing voters. If you're too detailed, people go, well, I didn't sign up for that. I'm not on board with that. Forget that. If you're vague, you can appeal to a broader swath of people. But when you get into office, you have less of a mandate. I mean, guns. I wrote about this in Politico a couple weeks ago. Guns have, certain things that pull well, but engender backlashes and make people flinch, particularly in certain states, politicians in certain states. If Biden was out there saying flat out, you vote for me and we have an assault weapons ban, and then he wins by 10 points and he flips Texas and Arizona and Georgia and Ohio, then maybe the politicians in those states say, well, I guess I can vote for an assault weapons ban and not piss off my voters because Biden was pretty crystal clear about it.
True. But they did spend a half hour, it felt like, on guns last night.
Well, they spent the time on it. I mean, and I take that. I don't take that as irrelevant. You had climate, guns, immigration as the three big issues of night 3. There was healthcare and criminal justice in night 2. But I felt that, this might be a bit of my own preconceived bias. I felt night 3 was a bit more, this is the legislative agenda. These are the legislative priorities for us. And so I think that matters. I do think there are something's going to get prioritized. Something's going to be Biden's emphasis in the first 100 days. And my guess is climate, immigration, guns on top of, COVID and economic relief will be the top priorities. But so far, it's not at the level of to do this specific thing, do this exact kind of policy. And therefore, moderate Democrat, soft Republican, you have license to join me on this because I won on this particular policy in the election.
I mean, vagueness is a benefit, right? Politically, maybe not in terms of legislatively, but I don't know if you saw this, Bill. You're a huge music guy. There was a John Cougar Mellencamp documentary, sort of, I don't even know what you call it, on Netflix, where like Mellencamp is doing a concert, but like while he's performing, you can hear him talking the whole time for like an hour in the background about the songs and about his life, kind of the biography of his life and the songs. And in that show, Mellencamp talks about songwriting, and he says, like, a song can't be too specific because then it doesn't resonate with enough people. Like, you want to hit themes that like a lot of people can identify with, but if it's too specific, then you lose people. And there's like an art form to that. And I think that's basically Joe Biden's doing the political version of that songwriting. He's letting you imagine that, oh, yeah, that's me. I can, you fill in the blanks yourself. And so that's probably a benefit, at least for now.
You know what we've not heard much about in this convention? Abortion.
We heard, I heard it last night. I heard it one time.
They had the women's rights segment. So they had a mention there, but it certainly wasn't like this is the abortion segment. This was the women's segment.
But it was something like Joe Biden will, fight to make sure that you have the right to an abortion and to, something like that. It wasn't Biden saying it, obviously. It was someone else said those words. And I think it was last night.
I mean, I remember in 2012, a heavy emphasis on reproductive rights and women's rights as a way to maintain energy and base enthusiasm for Obama's reelection. And it got a lot of attention because it was such a striking shift from the Bill Clinton, safe, legal, rare formulation. They were dropping the rare. They were just emphasizing broadly reproductive freedom. Well,
this is part of the war. This is part of Mitt Romney's war on women.
Right. That's right. That's right.
Which again, I could go into my rant on that, but I won't.
But it's notable that Joe Biden's someone who some people in the reproductive freedom activist community are skeptical towards. Biden has spoken in pro-life language at times in his career, although, as Matt Lewis has noted, he flip-flopped on the Hyde Amendment in this primary. But I think because having a woman vice presidential nominee is powerful in and of itself, and there's probably not a whole lot legislative that Democrats are going to push for on abortion. I mean, the main thing is really about judges, and that can go unspoken. There isn't a need to really emphasize it in an extended way, and which might help you appeal to certain right-leaning suburbanites.
Doesn't hurt. We should say, or I should also say, something I thought was really good was night 2, not the Joe Biden speech, but the Joe Biden video, like montage video or whatever, that was biographical about her meeting Joe Biden. And there were some just great lines in there about, where Biden says that his kids told him, I think we should marry her. Right? I think we should ask her to marry us. Right. Something like it's very heartwarming. The biographical story of Biden with the pictures and the love story and the tragedy is very compelling. And I thought that was maybe my favorite moment so far. I assume there'll be more of that tonight. I don't like the fact she goes by doctor. That's a turnoff.
Why?
I have a hard time trusting. It's like Dr. Seb Gorka. Unless you're in a college professor, unless you're my college professor right now, or you're a medical doctor, I don't like the doctor. The doctor thing seems inauthentic, but otherwise, I was all in on that segment.
But none of this changes your plans to vote. It's not making you a Biden voter in the general election.
No. We've already. And Bill, let me just say, I wasn't going to bring this up, but I'm down about 1,200. Remember how I lost over Justin Amash? I lost like 700 followers or something. In the past week or two, I'm down like 1,200 followers.
Now,
and it's more than that because I'm adding people, I'm adding followers, and I'm still negative, like 1,200 followers in like the last, let's say, 10 days.
Now, in the past 2 days for me, I got retweeted by Donald Trump.
Yes.
On I think it was Monday or Tuesday, and I have gained about 150 followers since then. Now, I'm not sure these are followers I really want to keep, but nevertheless.
Yeah. Well, here's the amazing thing, though, and Eric Nelson, who's a friend and a book publisher, says that Trump doesn't sell books, right? Like if you go on, if you go on Morning Joe, you're going to sell your book, or if Oprah likes your book, you're going to sell a lot of books, or if Terry Gross interviews you, you'll sell a lot of books. If Trump tweets about your book, apparently you don't sell it. It doesn't matter unless he attacks it. I mean, if he attacks it, maybe you do. But if Trump says like, go read Greg Gutfeld's latest book, it doesn't really, apparently, according to Eric, it doesn't work. And you would think, I don't know how many Twitter followers does Donald Trump have?
Oh, it's tens of millions.
Yeah. I would think.
Yeah, I mean, for him to get me 150 followers is not a massive.
It's a joke.
Not great emphasis about his pull.
You would think. Now, I remember when my book, Too Dumb to Fail, came out. I thought, that it would be awesome if Trump attacked me on Twitter and attacked the book, and maybe it would have been. But you would think that. So, like, Trump retweeted you to tens of millions of people. And your tweet, the last time I checked, which was yesterday, got like 5,000 retweets, which is nice. But wouldn't you think that if Trump tweeted something that it would like really blow, that it would like get you more than 150 followers? I would think statistically, like, shouldn't you have gained thousands?
I mean, it wasn't the most exciting tweet. It's really weird that he retweeted it, quite frankly. It was a pretty. It was simply reporting something that Michael Moore said on MSNBC, that he thought Biden. He was expecting Biden to, quote, swing to the right and pick Susan Rice, and instead he swung to the left and picked Kamala Harris, which I thought was interesting because so many people on the Michael Moore left were really angry about the Kamala Harris pick and thought it was evidence that Biden was being too establishment and being a neoliberal and all that kind of thing. So it was putting Michael Moore in a different place than some of his brethren. I think to Trump, this was, aha, Kamala Harris is a radical leftist. See, I told you, Joe Biden is.
And not only that, but even Politico magazine's Bill Scher.
I don't even think it's like my name anything to do with it. I'm not even sure it got across his transom. But even to that view of it from the right perspective, it's just not that interesting. It's not something that I think warrants a whole lot of additional commentary. It was a pretty minor tweet.
I've never been tweeted. I've never been tweeted by Trump. But I get tweeted, like, I'll just give you like one example. When Jerry Stiller died, Ben Stiller tweeted about it, and I looked at like Ben Stiller's feed, and Ben Stiller was following me, but I wasn't following him, and now I am. But it's crazy when you think. It's crazy, like, when you think I just took out the garbage and, my kids told me I am old and, the neighbor's dog bit me, whatever horrible thing happened in your life. And then you're like, but the president of the United States just tweeted me. It's a weird, no respect at home, Bill, but Donald Trump's tweeting you. It's a weird life we have.
It is weird. I mean, and someone I'm friends with, pinged me on a DM saying, "You saw that Trump tweeted you," and I was like, "I didn't actually. I had no idea."
Yeah. And that's the other thing. I remember about more than a decade ago, I went to the gym and worked out, and then I went to a Starbucks and got a coffee, and I just picked up, for free. I was reading their New York Times without buying it, I think. And on the front page, I was quoted. It was something that I'd interviewed Newt Gingrich. And nobody told me, nobody called me, nobody invited me on TV. Like nothing happened. Like when I was a kid, I thought, if you were mentioned on the front page of the New York Times, even just as a source of something, that you were going to be like famous and rich and like the world was going to change, and like no one even noticed, or if they did, they didn't. Maybe it's a compliment. They didn't think it was a big deal, but like it was just weird to me that like you would think more would happen, wouldn't you?
Well, I've had these moments over the course of my political writing career. I remember when I first was mentioned in a USA Today article, I thought, this was back in the Liberal Oasis blogging days, I thought it was going to blow up after that. Of course, nothing happened. Or I got mentioned in a New York Times magazine piece about blogging. I thought that was going to be a big deal, and nothing major happened. When I got my first New York Times op-ed, I thought that was going to be a game changer, and it wasn't a game changer.
Yeah.
There's just too much going on.
That's one of the things that helps me kill the nerves, by the way. People think like, aren't you nervous if you go on TV? And I'm like, clearly you don't realize how little this matters. Right. I mean, like, right. I wish I could get people tweeting about me. You know what I mean? Like outrage. And then the funny thing is, every once in a while I do accidentally, and the world, it feels like the world turns on you, and it feels like everybody in the world's attacking you. But mostly it's just like crickets, But let me get back to the 1,200 followers I've lost.
Yes.
I think we've mentioned it before, but Bill, there is now an expectation that if you are a journalist and you are not praising Joe Biden all the time, that you are rooting for Donald Trump to win. And I'm getting that all the time. I mean, I was criticizing and attacking Donald Trump when some of today's most prominent never Trumpers were voting for Donald Trump or at least saying nice things about him. I was against him. I was country when country wasn't cool. And now if I write something as a journalist, as a conservative opinion journalist, if I write something like I wrote this piece, I think we mentioned it last week about, there was some Democrats who were saying, like, get ready for the sexist attacks on Kamala Harris. And I wrote something like, hey, let's not forget the sexist attacks on Sarah Palin. And the world turned against me and denied that there were sexist attacks on Sarah Palin. And besides, she deserved them all because she's a racist. And I was accused of trying to get Donald Trump elected. No, I'm guilty of trying to write a column that says something else.
Well, this is what I think is going to be hard for you in this period of time. We're in the general election season, and people's political sensibilities are very heightened. And you have an argument that got a lot of resonance last night, which is Donald Trump is an existential threat to our democracy, and we need to come together to stop it. Nothing else matters but to protect our democracy by defeating Donald Trump in a colossal way that leaves no question about where America stands. And so anything you do between now and November 3rd that is not part of that project is going to be attacked as detrimental to that project.
Oh, I completely agree. That is the scenario. And I'm playing, I'm like, well, my job is to be a conservative columnist who criticizes everybody, tells the truth as I see it, writes interesting, counterintuitive, things, forces people to grapple with things they may not want to grapple with, and those two things are at odds because they want me to be an activist who is like actively working to defeat Donald Trump and elect Joe Biden. And that's not how I see my role.
Well, that's
Although
really
I would argue that I've probably written more horrible things about Donald Trump than almost anybody else in America. and my track record is pretty lengthy of this as well.
Well, what I think is frustrating for us political writers is that I think people assume that anything that a political opinion writer writes has ulterior motive, that you are an activist.
Yes.
You are doing this because you're trying to push forth a particular political outcome, and therefore anything you do that is not not supporting my preferred outcome, you must be trying to work against me and my agenda. And people are not thinking like you are a writer first and foremost, trying to write interesting things to stimulate thought, and but it doesn't have to necessarily mean that you're trying to engineer a political outcome.
Yeah, I think it's projection. They are activists, and they see it as very black and white. And you're either down with the cause or you're part of the problem or part of the solution, which means, follow that to its logical conclusion, every journalist, and this is what like Wesley Lowery, I think, wants us all to be, but every journalist is actually an activist. The theory is that we should all be fighting to elect Joe Biden. And like, that's not journalism, last time I checked. And as a conservative opinion journalist, I feel like there is a value added to me critiquing both sides, right? And that gets called both siderism, I think, right? But I would say I have written so much more bad things about Donald Trump than I have. But I think now that we're within 100 days, it's even worse. It's like you will give no aid and comfort to the enemy. If you are not 100% down with the cause, then that's not like I'm not I used to be a political operative, right? I'm not I did this because I didn't want to be a political hack. I don't, I want to be contrarian and independent and honest, right? And tell the truth. Like if I wanted to be a political operative or a hack, I would have I would probably make more money doing that. It wouldn't be as fun.
Well, we should probably leave it there because my battery is going to run out, and we've gone over an hour. And we got more to say tomorrow on DMZ Zoom, post Biden's acceptance. So if you're not already a Patreon supporter of ours, of one of us, feel free to do that now, and you'll get the Zoom link, and we'll chat tomorrow.
And not only that, not only will you get the Zoom link, but you'll also be helping support this kind of conversation, which I think is thoughtful and honestly, not everybody likes these kind of conversations. So help us keep the pirate ship afloat, as it were. and we'll see you tomorrow or next week.
All right. Take care.
See you, Bill.